Welcome back. In the last movie that I recorded, we spoke about fear and what fear is, what it does to your body, and kind of the different types of fear. Now, those are just some of the different types of fear. Today, in this video, what I figured we would do is actually delve into our fears themselves and possibly bring up some of the different ways that you can treat that fear or those specific types of fear. So, one of the most common types of fear that I come across is fear of failure. Now, this can transform in many different ways. It could be a relationship that you're in, and perhaps you have a fear of actually failing at some point, maybe failing yourself, or failing them, or failing your children, or even maybe failing your parents' expectations of you. This can also come in the format of a job. If you have such a drive to succeed, and of course that can be, fear of failure put upon you by somebody else. So it could be circumstances with your family again, or it could just be yourself if you are a person who is very goal orientated and you're driven that way. If you fail on one of those things, or you feel or perceive that you have failed, then of course that's a letdown to you, and that's a letdown to all parts of your being. But I propose that you look at it this way. What is fear really? What does it mean to you? When you have a fear of failing at something, why is that? What is it deep down inside that you're fearing the failure to be? So, what do you perceive it to be? Now, in the eyes of the universe, there is no failure. Everything, even your perceived biggest failures in life, are in fact your greatest lessons. So, one aspect of this that I propose you look at is, what are your fears and how do they drive you? And then look at it from another perspective, and that is to see it in the eyes of the universe. Now, that's all said and done very easily, if you're the universe, but when we're stuck in a rut, or we're stuck in our lives that are, go, 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 and we don't take a lot of time for ourselves to sit down and, you know, really look at ourselves deeply, that leads us to a point of, well, how much time do I have? How much, and that's another thing, fear of time, not having enough time, enough. There's a lot of things that fear revolves around. So when you're actually wanting to stop and look at your fear of failure in itself, what is it that you're failing? If you have a relationship or a marriage that is dissolving in front of you, is it a failure? Especially if it's, say, an abusive relationship, or mentally traumatic or anything like that. Are you actually failing, or are you failing by not seeing what benefits are coming out of it? Because every failure that you perceive to have, these are your greatest lessons, and the universe sees it that way. That is why they are delivered to you. That is why you complete or you don't complete your karmic patterns until you actually look at it from that perspective and learn from those lessons, those hard times, those karmic patterns. So look at it from that perspective. First, I'll give you a little example of my own experience. I was married for 6 years, and it was a very trying time in my life. It became emotionally abusive and mentally abusive and constricting in many ways, and it was torture. It really was. I left several times, and every time my ex told me that he would change, and things did change for a very short time. Sometimes it was only a few weeks, sometimes it was a month and a half. Uh, One time it was 2 months. And at that point, I realized that I was just going back to the same thing and being conned into it, but I was giving my power away. But what I was afraid of was having to start over again and having to be alone. And I was afraid of failing my marriage because for me, marriage was always like one of those high sanctities. Once you get married, you're married. You don't stray away from that. And I never thought I would actually be in that position where I was, I didn't know myself at all. I lost myself in that relationship because all of my emotions had been stripped down and away, and I had no control over my life, it seemed like. Um, and I just didn't know who I was anymore. So there was all these things, but yet I still perceived it as a failure, and that was just the belief system that I picked up and how I was raised, right? So these beliefs that I picked up were controlling my need to stay. So when I say beliefs, these are things that perhaps are not even our own beliefs. Perhaps they're a belief of our parents, or maybe they're a belief that we heard from our grandparents, in their generation. Or maybe it's from your religious organization, or maybe it's from the news or TV or your friends or anybody. And you look at other people, and especially, your peers, your friends, you're looking at their relationships and you're thinking, wow, they're so great. And honestly, everybody thought that our relationship was that way. And we heard it all the time. Yet behind closed doors, it was completely opposite. It was a nightmare. And that just shows you how much we judge ourselves and we judge others and we base ourselves off of others. So I'm telling you to stop doing that, first of all. Stop comparing yourself and stop judging yourself and your relationship or anything else, your job, anything else, based upon another person's. And that goes for your experience in life too. Now, I say that because we've all been through so many different experiences. We are all so very vastly different in what we experience and how we experience that. And I mentioned that in my last video. You cannot hold two needles up together and say they're the same. You can't. They are different, just like each one of our experiences. And so to compare our experience with another person's experience, or even another relationship to my relationship, there's no comparison. Bottom line, there isn't. So first of all, stop doing that. Now, the other thing is, of course, when I left that relationship, yeah, I perceived it as a failed marriage. Definitely. That was my belief system at the time. It took a lot of time for me to realize that, in fact, that was one of my greatest lessons. And the reason that I incurred such a traumatic experience was because I had never healed one of my first intimate experience with a human being in that way. I had never healed from the trauma that I experienced at that time. And therefore, what happened is I incurred a pattern that just kept repeating itself and getting worse and getting worse and getting worse until I was actually able to understand the root of that pattern and all of the different facets that created. So of course it wasn't just one pattern, it was several, which is why I kept, bringing in people who were the same, who actually seemed really, really amazing at first. And then the switch happened. And for me, I eventually realized that this was a great lesson. This was one of my greatest karmic patterns to heal. And once I realized that, it started to wash away. And I actually started having more of my intuition coming through about other things, which, were past life pains and traumas and, fears that I had to confront. So once you realize it, sometimes you don't really need to do too much more. As long as you fully grasp the pattern and how that may have actually affected you later on. And if you're not altogether too sure and you need to write it down to process it, that's totally okay too. I will link the video below for my processing tool on how to do that. But if you're like me, and if you're on this whole ascension path like I am, then there's a good chance that your abilities, your gifts, are all opening up slowly but surely. Maybe you're just not aware or how it functions or, But once you start examining these things, I find for me, they just start to flow. Like they create a flow because your higher self goes, oh yeah, they're paying attention now. They're getting it. They're getting the message. So first examine. And what helped for me actually was talking about it. As I had mentioned in my Saturn Return movie, I am seeing somebody that I can actually speak to about my life story because there's nobody that I've ever told my full life story to in completion. And I've never felt open enough to be able to do that. So all of this kind of really being able to just be free and speak about it. And I'm sure I could have just wrote it down too, but it just, for me, the time thing for writing just isn't there right now. So if I wanted to write about it, which I will eventually, I need a little more time. So to be able to speak it was one of my greatest gifts to me because it gave me the opportunity to express what pain I had inside. And my guides and my higher self were guiding me along at the time to talk about two different things that were totally separate from each other and seemed irrelevant from each other. That is until I put them back to back. And voila, there came the experience of the understanding of how one triggered the rest. So that is one way of looking at those things. Now, the other thing is, once you start getting to that point of really breaking down what is driving you to stay in a certain job or a relationship, I want you to write it down. Take a piece of paper, and on one side, you're going to write all the things that brought you there in the first place and that you loved initially. And then you're going to write down, it's like your pros and cons, right? Then you're going to write down all of the things that you really dislike about it. But the difference here is you're not just going to have pros and cons. Leave a space in the middle. And in the middle, after you've got all your pros and your cons, you're going to write down what really drives you to stay there, like what your fear is. So this is the way that you evaluate what's driving you to stay there. Possibly it is, if it's a job, it can be a lack of that amount of money. Maybe you hate the job. You can't stand going to work. It makes you miserable being there. Yet it pays the bills and then some. Or maybe it just pays the bills, but it's decent. Or maybe there's, not that many jobs in your area. Maybe it's a fear of not enough instead of a fear of failure. Or maybe if you leave that job, your spouse and family will be let down. or perceive you as a failure. Evaluate in the middle of this sheet what it is that's actually driving that fear. And then you can look at it rationally, because what we know is that we can create anything. So if it's a fear of failing, or a fear of somebody else perceiving us as failing, like our family, what I would recommend is that you look further past that fear and look within, because the fear is a belief system that you picked up along the way. And if it is a belief system, then you need to clear the belief. So you need to repattern your brain. And repatterning your brain can look like a lot of different things. And I do this in my blocks energy clearing sessions, because it is so ingrained within all of us, all of these beliefs. It's not just one. There are just so many beliefs within us that we've picked up that aren't even ours. And we just roll on with them. So what I would recommend, I guess, firstly, for most of you, is first understand what that fear is. And then look past it to the belief that you picked up. Then write down underneath that fear in the middle the belief. So, not enough. And then is it not enough, like you don't have enough, or is it I'm not enough? Look at what the different types of not enough are and which ones resonate, and then write down what that is. And then from there, you're going to have to heal that belief system. So one is to reprogram your brain. And that can be challenging. It can take some time. In my sessions, I do it faster, but one way that you can do it is just imagine, if you are a visual person, imagine like a stop sign. Every time that that belief surfaces, or you feel like you can't leave your job, because da 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 da. As soon as those thoughts start coming into your mind, you imagine a stop sign. And from there, you're going to implement the new belief. I can create anything I like. I am a creator. I can create that new job. I can love that new job. And you can imagine that new job. Whatever you need to do, you're going to actually put in the opposite thought, essentially, is how that works. So if you're not a visual person, if you can't imagine that stop sign, then just think of something that is going to fit within your constructs. So for me, that looks like I just say, you don't get to control me, or you can say something like, you know what? I choose something different. I choose different thoughts, because it is a choice. It is a choice to allow this program to keep running in the same old way, or to do something new with it and install different software or even hardware. You can change your mind, and it's up to you to repattern it. So like I said, this method does take some time, because your mind has been operating on this system for however long you've been in existence in this body. So for me, that's a while. For some of you, it's even longer. And for some of you, it's less time. So the less time, the faster it's going to go. Now, if it boils down to, I'm not enough, and your fear comes from, I am not enough, then there's a few things I want you to do. And I had this at the very beginning. This is one of the things that came up the most. And I bring this one up because it is so common. It is so very common in our societies, amongst the whole world, to not feel like we're enough. And that's intentional. I mean, if you don't feel like you're enough, then you're going to stop at, I've done my job, and that's it. I'm not going to go any further. And you're going to stop at, I just want to sit in front of the TV and relax. I don't want to look within because it's too painful. You're going to stop at a lot of things. You're not going to progress because you're not enough. And it's easy to stay in that realm. It's conditioning, really. So if you are not enough, if you feel like you are not enough, and I know you are, you definitely are. And if I can overcome this one, so can you. If you feel this way, first things first, go to that mirror, go to wherever you're going to be looking. I did it in several parts of my house. I even wrote posters, and I wrote it on my fridge in a dry erase marker. I wrote it on the mirror. You can use dry erase markers, you can use lipstick, you can use whatever you have access to. If it's a Jiffy marker or a pencil, write it on a piece of paper and stick it somewhere where you're going to see it all the time. I am enough. It's simple, right? Every time that you see that, I want you to say it out loud. And I want you to say it more than once. I am enough. And at first you're going to be like, I am enough. And you're not going to believe it. You're not going to believe it. But if you say it often enough, eventually your heart is going to change and that energy behind it is going to change. And you're going to start to kind of have a twinge of belief like, I am enough? I guess maybe that could be possible. And then your mind is going to start getting used to the idea. Because that's the thing. If you just jump in and you're like, I'm enough, I'm enough, I'm enough, well, you might cause some resistance depending on how deep that conditioning goes. Maybe, after about a month, you'll actually believe it. And you might even make a song about it, like I did. And any time that I started getting triggered by something, I would realize that, okay, this one actually goes back down because I had done the work. I understood what was driving that fear, and that was that I'm not enough. I would just go around singing my song. So I would start having, the thoughts come into my head that I'm not enough. Essentially, it wasn't saying I'm not enough, but, the negative thought spirals that led to that feeling of not being enough. As soon as those came into my mind, I would just say, you know what? No, I'm in control of me, and I am enough. And I would say, I love myself, I am enough, and I would sing it to a song. And maybe singing is not your forte, and maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe you want to do it some other way. Great. Do that. Do it however it suits you. This is just an idea of what you need to do to reprogram your mind. So those two things are the first things that I did to, I guess, transcend that fear of not being enough. And then the other thing that you need to do, because this in itself, is starting to slowly raise your self-esteem, give yourself credit. If you suffer from I am not enough, give yourself credit for everything that you can think of as often as you can think of it. And you can also put that on a poster. Give yourself credit, because we don't do it often enough. Look at your accomplishments from day to day. I'm not talking about, in the beginning. Don't look at them over the long span of time, because that is not necessarily a good indication of how far you've come. If you're at the bottom and you need somewhere to start, especially with I am not enough, that fear is intense, and it's going to drive you for a long time until you finally reprogram your mind. If it is I am not enough, then give yourself credit for the things that you're doing throughout the day. And that could be as simple as, I did the dishes. Oh my gosh. For me, that's a big deal, because That's like one of the things that I absolutely hate doing. I would rather clean a bar toilet, which I've done, than do the dishes. At least it used to be like that. It's getting better now. But that was part of my thing. I had to recognize that, wow, that's great. I'm making advancements. Like I did the dishes. And it's simple. It sounds silly, but it works. Because we need to feed ourselves if we're in that state. If that is our fear, we need to feed ourselves. We rely totally on everybody else to feed that within us. But it's our responsibility to give it to us. We cannot rely on anybody else in the outside world to give us the satisfaction and the words of affirmation that we need to thrive. Only you can do that. And this is what I want you to do. I want you to start looking at it this way and understanding that you are responsible for your own happiness. Nobody else. Not your mom, not your dad, not your siblings, not your partner, not your kids, not your boss, not your friends. You and only you. And only you can know exactly what you need. I mean, of course, you can get help from other people to help you understand what you need, but you know yourself best. And if you don't, then start getting to know yourself by doing these kinds of exercises. Because as soon as you start looking, you will start getting answers. You'll start to know who you are and recover these aspects of yourself. So you need to definitely start filling your cup up with your own love. That's the biggest thing. If I am not enough. That's what I can say about the two biggest fears that kind of exist in our reality. Those are some of the tools that you can use. Other things you can think about are essentially deleting these thoughts. So this is kind of what I was talking about before in my energy block clearing sessions. I actually embed specific words and we bring up all of the stuff that you have as a belief system that controls the different types of fear. And then we delete them from your working mind and from your being because it resonates throughout your whole being, not just within your mind. But of course, your mind being so powerful, here's where you're going to start. You're going to start to reprogram it. And some of you already have been given this knowledge, but haven't actually been putting it into use. And the exercise that I gave you is the most fundamental way to break it down and to get to the root of the belief, because that's what you're after. You're not after the fear itself, because the fear is just a mechanism that's driven by the belief system that you have incurred over your lifetime. So, with that, in the next video, I'm going to discuss past life fear. And I'm quite excited about that because I've had a past life dream that really is going to propel this conversation. So keep posted for that one. If I can think about any more about fear and maybe give you some more exercises, I will think about it and I will ask my guides for some more guidance. If that's the case, I will make 5 videos on fear, but for now, 4. And if you like what you're hearing, or you would like to book a session with me, of course, I do offer these energy block clearing sessions as well as just energy clearing sessions. And you can check out my website, and that is at stormbydesignintuitive.com. You can check me out on Facebook as well and friend me on Facebook. I do give away 1 free session a month, and usually it's a soul tapping session, but I like to mix it up sometimes, and I like to pick out of any of my 3 different platforms. So that would be my subscribers to my blog posts, or my friends list on Facebook, as well as my subscribers here. So I hope to see you all in the next video. And if you have any ideas on videos that you might like to see, then feel free to drop it in the comments below. And I will see you next week. Love to you all. Bye.